quiet on the set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Welcome back to the Rebuttal podcast. There is a trigger warning for this episode for graphic descriptions of death involving children. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Shortly after 2 a.m. on the morning of July 23rd, 1982, actor Vic Morrow paced nervously in front of a mock Vietnamese village that had been erected in the Indian Dunes Park just north of Los Angeles. For this shot, John Landis had dropped Morrow's character into the Vietnam War to enact what was intended as a redemption scene. The heroic rescue of 2 children from a village as it erupted into flames. "I'll keep you safe, kids," Morrow was supposed to say. The children in his arms, My-ca Dinh, 7, and Renee Chen, 6, had never acted before. They were not supposed to be on this movie set at 2 in the morning on July 23rd, 1982. After 3 straight weeks of night shooting, the entire company was feeling worn down. Now, it was almost over. The last scene to be shot that night was also the very last scene in John Landis' episode of Twilight Zone, the movie. It would show the destruction of the Vietnamese village in a series of enormous explosions. Everyone knew the first take had to be perfect, because once the village was demolished, the cost of rebuilding it would be prohibitive. Vic Morrow had participated in difficult and dangerous scenes before, but tonight, he felt particularly keyed up. On the one hand, the Twilight Zone film, produced by Landis and Steven Spielberg, represented his biggest career break in more than a decade, and he wanted the climax to be thrilling. Yet, Morrow could not help but feel uneasy as he watched the Huey helicopter approach the village for a final rehearsal. Years earlier, he had had a premonition that he was going to die in a helicopter crash. While he was shooting the movie Dirty Mary Crazy Larry in 1973, he had insisted on having a $1 million life insurance policy taken out on him before he would shoot any scenes involving the helicopter he was due to ride in. Vic Morrow was very insistent, and when asked why, he replied, quote, "I have always had a premonition I was going to die in a helicopter crash." Now, in 1982, on the Twilight Zone set, John Landis, the director, who was 20 years Morrow's junior, gave the actor a pep talk to reassure him. Then, the 2 children who were to appear in the scene with Morrow were led onto the set. The parents of 7-year-old My-ca Dinh and 6-year-old Renee Chen were also visibly nervous. Filmmaker John Landis was actively violating California's child labor laws when he hired these 2 children without the required permits. State law also did not permit children to work at night. In order to do so, Landis had to seek a special waiver, which he did not get and did not even try to get, because he did not think that he would get permission for such a late hour, again, 2 a.m., or because he knew that he would not get approval to have young children in a scene with a large number of explosives. Casting agents were unaware that the children would be involved in the scene. The children's parents were told not to tell any firefighters on the set that the children were part of the scene and hid them from a fire safety officer who also worked as a welfare worker. The children were hired after Peter Wei-Tae Chen, Renee's uncle, was approached by a colleague whose wife was a production secretary for the film. Chen thought of his brother's Taiwanese-born daughter Renee, whose parents agreed to let her participate. He then called a Vietnamese colleague, Daniel Lee, who had a young son named Mika. Mika was an outgoing boy who enjoyed posing for pictures, so his parents thought he would be interested. Chen testified that he was never informed that either of the children would be working near explosives or even the helicopter. Chatting excitedly to the kids and their parents, Landis tried to allay their fears as well. When the cameras were ready to roll, Landis waded into the shallow water of the Santa Clara River to signal the start of filming. The helicopter, a huge steel warship with rotor blades measuring 44 feet in diameter, thundered toward the set. Morrow was to carry the 2 children across the river while the chopper strafed them and the village exploded in the distance. In his screenplay, the 31-year-old Landis had described the scene this way, quote, "The helicopter makes another pass and then one of the huts explodes in a spectacular fireball. Bill, holding a child in each arm, makes a Herculean effort and runs for the shallow river. With the huts burning behind them, Bill runs as best as he can across the river." While 6 cameras captured the action on film, director Landis shouted orders into his bullhorn. Lower, 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 fire, fire, fire. A cluster of grass huts exploded in the background as the low-flying helicopter swooped nearer to the flames. About 24 feet above Morrow and the children hovered 3 tons of noisy metal, a combat-style Huey UH-1B helicopter. As a special effects man fired gasoline and sawdust mortars skyward, Morrow stumbled in the water, righted himself, and slogged on, still carrying the 6-year-old girl and 7-year-old boy in his arms. The helicopter was piloted by Vietnam War veteran Dorsey Wingo. During filming, Wingo stationed his helicopter 24 feet from the ground while hovering near a large mortar effect. He then turned the aircraft 180 degrees to the left for the next camera shot. The effect was detonated while the helicopter's tail rotor was still above it, the metal lid on top of the mortar striking the tail rotor, causing the rotor to fail and detach from the tail. The low-flying helicopter spun out of control. At the same time, Morrow had dropped Chen into the knee-deep water he was slogging through. Still holding on to 7-year-old Ma-ca, he was reaching out to grab 6-year-old Renee Chen when the helicopter fell on top of him and the 2 children. While 6-year-old Renee was crushed under the helicopter's right skid, the main rotor blade, still spinning, decapitated 53-year-old Morrow and 7-year-old Ma-ca, before finally coming to a stop. The last words of Vic Morrow before filming the scene were, quote, "I've got to be crazy to do this shot. I should have asked for a double." Landis's first thought was, quote, "What the fuck is the helicopter doing in my shot?" Then he felt a sudden chill. Oh my God, where are Vic and Ma-ca and Renee? Landis rushed toward the helicopter. Right behind him was his second assistant director, Anderson House, a young man working on one of his first major studio movies. House reached down and picked up Vic Morrow's torso. His first impression was that a dummy must have fallen out of the helicopter. He saw no blood, and the object he held felt oddly rubbery. Then he saw Vic's head lying near the shore, and the sudden revelation of what he was carrying hit him like a thunderbolt. Oh my God, he screamed. His cry carried all the way to the top of the cliff overlooking the river. Only then did the crew members gathered there realize the magnitude of the disaster. The next thing they heard was the shrill, keening wail of Renee's mother, Cheyenne Huey Chen, who was kneeling over the crushed remains of her dead child, pleading with the girl to wake up. The last thing Ma-ca's father saw was his decapitated head floating in the water before he was escorted off the set. One of the grisliest scenes in the history of American movies had just played out, not on the screen, but in real life, and it would result in the manslaughter trial of 5 individuals involved with the production of the movie. Its reverberations would be felt for years to come throughout the entertainment industry, the aviation industry, within the legal system, and among ordinary citizens who wondered how such a calamity could ever be permitted to occur. Was it foreseeable? Let's find out. Accidents had taken place on movie sets before, but this was the first time a director was ever criminally charged because of a fatality that occurred during filming. As the Twilight Zone trial unfolded, a picture emerged of ambition, recklessness, and well-meaning ineptitude. A picture that reflected the behavior of the men on trial as well as the tactics of those who were prosecuting them. This is the before, during, and aftermath of the awful moment when Vic Morrow and 2 tiny children lost their lives in a make-believe war, and how safety regulations on sets, child labor laws, and even aviation regulations were irrevocably changed as a result. Born in Chicago in 1950 and raised in the well-to-do Westwood section of Los Angeles, Landis had solid family connections. One relative had started the Mission Pack food business, a hugely successful operation that distributed fresh California fruit around the world. And an uncle was an entertainment industry attorney who became a prominent Los Angeles judge. John's father, Marshall Landis, was an artistic bohemian sort with a troubled personality. He worked as an interior designer and developed a clientele among residents of the affluent Westwood and Brentwood suburbs. But in 1952, when he was 30 years old, he was charged with grand theft for stealing a Picasso drawing from a local art gallery. Police discovered 2 other stolen paintings in his possession. Friends who accompanied him to court for his arraignment described him as a very sick boy, 30, mind you, 30 years old, very sick boy, and said arrangements had been made for him to enter a psychiatric hospital. In 1956, Marshall Landis died suddenly and under mysterious circumstances after undergoing an operation in Minneapolis. It was clear early on that John had inherited some of his father's artistic temperament. Clever and precocious, young John was too fidgety to do well in school, but he had a distinct creative flair as well as an entrepreneurial instinct. After his stepdad helped him build a wooden stage, John would cart it around the neighborhood to perform puppet shows at children's birthday parties. He charged $25 per show. His career ambitions were set early on. Slender and unathletic like his father, John spent much of his time in front of the television set or at the movie theaters that dotted the streets of Westwood Village. At the age of 8, he went to see The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and as he later said, quote, "I went crazy. I had a total movie-going experience. I experienced complete suspension of disbelief. It was wonderful. He resolved at that moment to become a movie director. Landis would drop out of high school in the 10th grade, and at 17, he landed a job in the mailroom at 20th Century Fox. One of his idols, two-time Academy Award winner George Stevens, was more than a little skeptical when Landis approached him outside the kitchens at 20th Century Fox and told him that he had directed some of the young man's favorite movies. Name 3 of them, Stevens barked. Landis not only reeled off the titles, but meticulously recapped specific scenes and shots. Charmed, Stevens invited the brash young fellow to lunch. From there, Landis was offered odd jobs on movie sets for the next few years until he finally got his shot to direct his first movie. Landis's approach to his first filmmaking venture was freewheeling. He was literally winging it. His own immersion in the world of movies and his limited experience in real life sometimes made it difficult for him to distinguish between the two. If actors or crew members balked at a stunt, Landis would tell them jauntily, "It's so easy." A scene in which a real plate glass window was shattered and another in which a young boy was thrown across a table were executed cavalierly, but with only a few minor bruises. Luckily, Landis boasted that he could persuade his crew members to do absolutely anything he wanted them to do. Sometimes he cajoled them into going along with his audacious schemes, and sometimes he simply bullied them into submission. But if he showed traces of a volatile temper even then, most of the time, his enthusiasm, in addition to his temper, was so infectious that his coworkers were eager to follow his lead. Landis's first movie was obviously not a success. He ended up needing to work several odd jobs for the next few years and live off of his parents. He moved back in with his mother and pursued all of the connections that his parents had in the area. Finally, in 1976, John landed another directing assignment on a low-budget, low-brow comedy called The Kentucky Fried Movie, written by 3 young men who would later strike it rich with Airplane. The Kentucky Fried Movie opened in the summer of 1977 and turned a modest profit. It also received at least one review that pointed the way toward Landis's future. Quote, "The Kentucky Fried Movie is a sort of National Lampoon that talks and moves." By the time that review appeared, Landis had already been signed by Universal to direct a low-budget feature written by 3 staffers from the National Lampoon. Maddie Simmons, the publisher of the Lampoon, had persuaded Universal that the magazine's outrageous satire could be translated to the movies and delight a collegiate audience. That movie was National Lampoon's Animal House. It was budgeted at a measly $2.7 million, and Universal didn't much care who directed it, obviously, since they hired John Landis. There were a number of people who weren't sure that Animal House was the right thing for a respectable corporation to be doing, but it was a little movie. No one spent a lot of time worrying about it, except for John. Now, one of the most famous casting choices was John Belushi, who was to play one of the frat members of the Animal House. Just after being signed to direct the picture, Landis flew to New York to meet with Belushi, who at that time was one of the bright lights of Saturday Night Live, but had not yet appeared in any movie. The late-night series had been on the air for only 2 years already, but Hollywood had not really taken notice of it. Quote, "Hollywood goes to sleep at 8 o'clock, says Bernie Brillstein, who was Belushi's manager at the time. Nobody out here knew the power of Saturday Night Live. They only paid Belushi $30,000 to do the movie." Most of Animal House was shot in Eugene, Oregon in the fall of 1977. It had been difficult finding a college that would allow its facilities to be used, but the University of Oregon finally agreed. The company stayed at a roadway inn 30 miles outside of town, and there were several all-night parties for cast and crew members, many of whom were getting their first break on a studio picture. One of the actors, Peter Reigart, was dating Bette Midler, and she visited the location and led the informal rowdy jam sessions after shooting. Quote, "I knew I'd never work on another movie that was as much fun as Animal House," says Catherine Wooten, who Landis hired as his script supervisor once again. Filming was completed at the Universal backlot in January 1978, and for the most part, shooting had gone smoothly. Landis was determined to make a good showing and prove to the studio that he was capable of sticking to schedules and budgets. Previews in the spring of 1978 indicated that Universal might have a major hit on its hands, and suddenly the older executives at the studio began treating the film as something more than an embarrassing stepchild. The movie ended up grossing $200 million, making it the most profitable comedy in movie history at that time. Landis was 28 years old when Animal House came out, and it turned him into an instant powerhouse. Universal awarded him 2.5% of the movie's profits, and as he brazenly told one interviewer, quote, This makes me a millionaire. Manic with delight after the film's phenomenal opening week, Landis gave one interview in which the reporter described him as, quote, wriggling and jiggling like a 10-year-old boy. He'd tap his fingers and jiggle his legs to the beat of a distant Roomba. Even then, however, Landis reacted violently to any negative criticisms. Although he had made a career out of mocking others, he had a hard time laughing at himself. When New West magazine printed a humorous comic strip depicting an interview with the hyperkinetic Landis, the director shot back an angry letter accusing the magazine of anti-Semitism. One of his childhood friends, Rick Foster, says with a certain sadness that everything changed about Landis after Animal House. His good-natured temper and free delight and love of life and exuberance and excitement about movies, those didn't leave. But what came was an arrogance and a brashness and a recklessness that hadn't been there before. He snubbed all of his friends who had been with him through his struggles and through being unemployed and through being an aspiring director, and was basically just an asshole. It all went to his head. Quote, he was always so childlike and so child-oriented. He was the kind of person who wouldn't even drive fast on a residential street for fear of hurting a child. I don't know what happened to him after Animal House. It's a mystery to me how he did what he did to those children on Twilight Zone. John Landis' stature after the success of Animal House was confirmed not only by the salary he commanded and the power he was granted, but by the new friends he made. Soon after that movie opened to blockbuster business, Landis received a telephone call from none other than Steven Spielberg, inviting him to dinner. A few years older than Landis, Spielberg was not yet the most successful filmmaker in Hollywood. E.T. was still 4 years away, but he had already directed two of the biggest hits of the 1970s, Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he was a media darling as well as an industry titan. As the prosecutor in the Twilight Zone trial would later remark, that dinner invitation from Spielberg represented a, quote, feather in Landis's cap. All of these young directors believed that box office success had entitled them to indulge their most extravagant fancies. It is worth noting that the blockbuster movie, quote unquote, was essentially a new phenomenon born in the 1970s. Suddenly, one hit picture could gross more than the entire body of work turned out by John Ford or Frank Capra. Richard Zanuck, who produced Spielberg's Jaws, once observed that that single film probably earned him more money than his father, the legendary Darryl F. Zanuck, had accumulated in his lifetime. With so much money to be amassed so quickly, everyone in Hollywood went slightly crazy. Agents demanded outrageous terms of employment for their superstar clients, and studio executives, terrified on losing out on the next Star Wars or Animal House, nervously acquiesced. In the early days of Hollywood, the powerful heads of studios could be counted on to check a director's megalomaniac fantasies. But in the 1970s, the studios abdicated power. They granted not just final cut, but complete control to any director who scored at the box office. In 1979, John Landis began working on the Blues Brothers. He was completely caught up in the rush of success, and he savored the power that the studio granted him. Everything in the movie was monumentally overscaled. The concert scenes were filmed before thousands of extras. The cell blocks were the size of airplane hangars. The chase scenes contained not squads, but battalions of cars and tanks. Quote, it was a logistical nightmare, says Stephen Katz, the cinematographer who had worked with Landis on the low-budget Kentucky Fried Movie less than 3 years earlier, and now found himself embroiled in a spectacle of Demillion proportions. The stunts just grew and grew. 500 extras would be waiting around all day to film, and they would never get to the scene. Everything was grandiose. John was in a position to ask for anything he wanted. He would say, give me 20 cars instead of 10, and they would oblige him. Bernie Brillstein, who was John Belushi's manager at the time, was ultimately named to be executive producer of the Blues Brothers project. It was he who had sold the concept to Universal during a phone call, and Brillstein ultimately realized he had no power once the movie got underway. As he says, quote, in a movie, an executive producer is like dirt. It was my first movie and I knew nothing about the business, so I thought this was the way it was done. Everything was out of control. I've learned a lot about the business since then. Directors are still in control, but if you give them complete control, you are a lunatic. The movie had originally been budgeted at $12 million and ended up costing around $30. To those who questioned the director's extravagance, Landis retorted, quote, I will never apologize for spending money to entertain. I feel very good about it. He boasted that The Blues Brothers is one of the biggest films ever made. even bigger than Ben-Hur. The Blues Brothers also revealed Landis's taste for oversized special effects and massive on-camera mayhem. In one scene, an entire shopping mall is destroyed. In another, a car falls off a bridge, comes flying through the air, and crashes right through the pavement of the street. At the climax, dozens of careening police cars pile on top of each other in Chicago's Daily Plaza. The scene featured 300 on-screen collisions, with a total of 60 vehicles destroyed. What made no sense was that Landis's schooling in low-budget movie making, where crew members sometimes disregarded established safety procedures that were too expensive to save money, it carried over to his big-budget productions, despite the fact they did indeed have all the money in the world to adhere to these safety protocols. Quote, Spielberg's chase and crash scenes are more choreographed, suggests cinematographer Stephen Cass. With Landis, everything is more wild and crazy. He throws everything into the pot. Or, as I would probably prefer to describe it, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck or didn't kill somebody. During one of the chase scenes, Landis pressed the stunt drivers to go faster. Script supervisor Kathleen Wooten suggested undercranking the cameras, a common technique used by filmmakers to give the illusion of speed. No, Landis said to her, I just want them to go faster. Perhaps the most elaborate and dangerous scene was one that never ended up in the finished film. As the two main actors departed from a gas station, they unwittingly left a trail of gasoline and then dropped a match. The entire gas station exploded behind them. Quote, it was one of the most terrifying explosions I've ever seen, cinematographer Stephen Katz says. That scene cost a fortune, and it was never even used in the film. Katz approached all stunt scenes warily. On one of his first movies, Joyride, a stuntman had been killed in a car crash. On that same movie, Katz had barely missed being killed himself when another car hit an ice skid and smashed into the camera he was manning. A special effects expert was called to Chicago to see if he could help John Landis budget a little better, and what he arrived to was, quote, very poor planning on the production side. When John gets an idea, he wants it right now, forget what it costs, the expert said. There was a lot of money going down the tube. John is a nice enough guy, but he wants too much realism. That gets him into trouble. Movies are illusion. When The Blues Brothers was ready for release, Landis went on the offensive. He was irritated by all of the press reports about the movie's production problems. I've been under attack for a year, Landis angrily told one critic, and it's making me berserk. He illustrated the point by flinging a rubber band across the room. Landis decided he was the only one who could promote the movie properly. When the two star actors arrived at 6 o'clock one morning to tape the Today Show, Landis was already there trying to persuade the producers to put him on with the stars. When he later appeared at a press conference with his two stars, Landis was determined to dominate the discussion. He kept cutting off Belushi and Aykroyd, answering questions addressed to the actors until finally one reporter yelled out, would you let the other two guys do a little more of the talking? Executive producer Bernie Brillstein attended that press conference, and he was appalled to hear Landis compare the Blues Brothers to Singing in the Rain and The Wizard of Oz. No one doubted the sincerity of Landis's enthusiasm, but as Brillstein says, it would have been politic to be more humble. Landis announced that this is the greatest musical ever made. When you say that to the press, they're gonna gun for you. At a preview soon afterward at the Directors Guild Theater in Hollywood, Brillstein knew the movie was in trouble. I saw dead eyes coming out of that screening. The reviews confirmed Brillstein's worst fears. Even the indulgent Charles Champlin of the Los Angeles Times panned the movie under a headline that read, a $30 million wreck, minus laughs. The New York Times called it a bloated saga, and the Washington Post went further and labeled it a ponderous comic monstrosity. Writing in New West magazine, Kenneth Turan delivered the coup de grace. The Blues Brothers is the most expensive Roadrunner cartoon ever made. It has more car crashes than a demolition derby, fewer laughs than an afternoon at traffic school, and it cost anywhere from $27.5 million to $35 million, but who's counting? Certainly not Universal, which poured so much money down director John Landis' voracious maw that industry wits took to calling the film 1942. Despite the bad reviews, the Blues Brothers managed to earn a profit. People who worked with Landis thought that his ego had swelled along with his budget. Though Landis used to apologize for his temper after screaming at extras on the set of Animal House, after the success of that movie, he stopped doing that altogether. After Animal House, his associate remarks, John just didn't have time to buy an ice cream cone for everyone he was rude to. And he was rude to everyone. After the Blues Brothers, John Landis' next stop was the Twilight Zone movie. The original Twilight Zone series premiered on television in 1956 and aired for 5 seasons. Rod Serling directed, often wrote, and always introduced each segment. The introductions by the slim, dark-haired Serling were at once somber and teasing. The episodes were often surprising, ranging from lighthearted whimsy like Kick the Can, a program about the elderly finding childhood again, to dark parables about the mob mentality like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. The Twilight Zone showcased many actors who would later become household names, like William Shatner, Robert Redford, and Dennis Hopper. It produced works by writers who would become well-known, like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. Filmed in black and white, the show was inexpensively made and had little in the way of special effects. The audience got chills and thrills from the imaginative writing, the tight direction, and the way it played with the most common fears. As Matheson once wrote, the story was all in the Twilight Zone. The series became a cult classic. In 1981, director Steven Spielberg wanted to make a film inspired by the TV series. He enlisted the help of his friend, director John Landis. Although not highly regarded by critics, Landis had demonstrated an ability to make money with his comedies like Kentucky Fried Chicken, The Blues Brothers, and An American Werewolf in London. Landis and Spielberg agreed that they would be co-producers and equal partners in making the movie. Spielberg wanted an anthology of 4 stories, each of them approximately the same length as an episode of a TV Twilight Zone. 3 of these stories were based on episodes of the original series, and 1 was written by John Landis. Landis wrote a screenplay about an embittered white man named Bill Connor. Connor is first seen railing vulgarly in a bar against Jewish people, Black people, and Asian people. The bigot leaves the bar and steps into a series of scenes. Nazi-occupied France, where SS troops chase him, mistaking him for a Jewish person. He flees from the Nazis only to find himself in the Jim Crow American South, where Ku Klux Klansmen see him as a Black person and try to lynch him. He escapes from them and is suddenly in Vietnam, attacked by American GIs who think he is the enemy. Although Landis wanted to make a moral point with this film, the story had an ethical problem at its heart. Don't you think? I'm sorry, I can't take it seriously. And I understand that movies can sound very rash or brash or extremely just distasteful. Not even problematic, right? We should be making movies that deal with problematic topics. My idea, of course, is not censorship is what we get to when people start complaining about characters that are flawed in movies, characters that are inherently bad in movies, really terrible ideas and topics that are presented in movies, not because we glorify them, just because someone plays a character or writes a character or writes a scene in a movie that's terrible, inherently, morally, ethically to its core. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be shot. It doesn't mean that it's problematic. It doesn't mean that it's glorifying that. It means it's presenting it in a way which almost is a historical record of these things more so than it is a glorification when it's done correctly and properly. Obviously, there are so many instances where it is not done correctly and properly. But in this case, the movie was, yes, released. This movie, where 3 people, 2 of them children, died, was indeed completed released. I swear on my life. And it ended up being not even good. So I guess my idea of it being a really shitty concept is kind of correct. But again, it's an opinion. That's just me. To star as the repulsive Connor, the guy that we're not supposed to like, the main guy in John Landis' scene that he directs and writes, Landis hired Vic Morrow, a middle-aged actor at the time best known for playing tough guys, usually villains. When Landis submitted this script to Warner Brothers executives for their approval, 2 raised objections. Lucy Fisher, vice president in charge of production, and Terry Semel, president of the studio, thought that the central character was so negative that audiences would not be able to care about him. After a meeting with Fisher and Semel, Landis hit upon the idea of having Bill redeemed from his bigotry, running away from the American soldiers firing at him and an attack from a U.S. helicopter in Vietnam. He would come upon 2 Vietnamese orphans. Moved by their plight, the man would rescue them from an air attack, bravely carrying them across a river to save their lives. At the end, as an entire village is dramatically blown up in the background, the former racist would reassure the youngsters, "I'll keep you safe, kids, I swear to God." These script changes were approved. Do you even need my commentary about this? The white savior complex, former racist, former. Right. However, Landis ran into an obstacle in the form of California's child labor laws. Aren't they such a wet blanket? Wink, wink, sarcasm, sarcasm, oh my God, oh my God. Twilight Zone casting agents Michael Fenton and Marcy Leroff of Fenton Feinberg Casting told Landis and associate producer George Folsey Jr. that those regulations forbade children to work an hour past curfew and that a teacher welfare worker had to be present when kids worked. Now, mind you, this is the 80s, okay? Late 70s, early 80s. The fact that these laws were even in place at this time, okay, honestly impressive. Things have gotten stricter, regulations have become more technical and less broad, on case-by-case basis. Children have to be supervised literally 100% of the time that they're on set. Of course, that has not prevented horrific experiences as told by child actors, especially in the early 2000s with Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, all of that. I mean, there are not nearly enough protections for children even now in this industry. It doesn't really go unnoticed, and it should should not go unnoticed by the law that the biggest stars, the most successful, the ones that were just churning out hit after hit, the ones that were the most famous, they didn't even get the bare minimum protections. How do you think the child actors who are just extras feel? How do you think the child actors who will never know their names, right? Because they were whoever number 2 in commercials for their entire lives. Everything for the biggest stars that we saw was less than the bare minimum, was awful and not enough and not close to enough for any of them. Even the ones that ended up being very successful and seemingly put together. I mean, it just because it's survivorship bias, just because some people made it out relatively, presumably, okay enough to be portrayed on the outside like they're fine and they have it together, doesn't mean that things are fine. So yeah, I will say that in 2025, child labor laws with respect to child actors and those regulations to protect them specifically in this very niche area of work, this job that we're having children do for the sake of entertainment, literally for the sake of art and entertainment, they are not protected enough. How do you think it was in 1982? When this was filming? Not enough at all, but there were at least some protections. There were bare minimums that needed to be met still. There were laws, especially in California, in place that were hard and fast and set. And John Landis did not follow a single one of them. Not a single one. And he chose to do that. Casting agent Leroff remembered herself telling director John Landis that the Vietnam War scene struck her as, quote, kind of dangerous. Fenton told Landis that since the children were not going to have speaking parts, they were extras and could not be hired through Fenton-Feinberg casting. Ron Lebrecht wrote in special effects that Leroff claimed Fenton's response was a diplomatic way to avoid involvement in a questionable venture. So, as always, the adults do not protect the children, and the adults cover their own asses while putting the children in harm's way. They said, hey, these kids can't formally be hired through our casting agency, but here they are. Right. Employers could get waivers to work kids later than nighttime, for sure. But Landis did not seek one. The exact reason for this failure later became a matter of intense dispute. Either he thought he would not get the waiver because the hour was too late, or he knew he could not get approval to have kids around a helicopter and explosives. Nevertheless, and regardless of the reason, the director decided to break the law. He would employ the 2 children illegally and pay them out of petty cash to avoid putting their names on the payroll. Movie people commonly refer to 2 categories of workers, above the line and below the line. The first group consists of actors, producers, and directors. The second, larger group, includes camera operators, stunt personnel, makeup artists, and technicians of all sorts. In the Twilight Zone, unit production manager Dan Allingham oversaw most of the below-the-line hiring. Allingham was also first assistant director. The second assistant director, Anderson House, had reservations about working children after hours and around a helicopter and special effects explosives. He shared those concerns with Allingham. House wanted to know if Landis planned to film the kids during the daytime and artificially simulate night, then insert these shots into ones actually made at night. Allingham told him no. Later, House asked if Allingham knew if Landis had considered using dummies or dwarf stunt people instead of children. Allingham replied that Landis had rejected those ideas because he thought they would look phony. House pursued the issue, and Allingham told him there was no point in discussing it further. Allingham recommended that Paul Stewart be put in charge of special effects explosives. He had a fine reputation in the field and had previously worked with Vic Morrow on Combat. In early July 1982, Landis asked George Folsey to locate 2 young, Asian-looking children for the roles. Folsey agreed to do so despite misgivings. Production assistant Cynthia Nye recalled Folsey coming out of a meeting with Landis and production manager Dan Allingham. The trio discussed the illegal hiring of kids, and according to Nye, Folsey joked, "We'll probably all be thrown in jail for this." Quote unquote. Fate has a way of hinting at itself before smashing right into you, doesn't it? Folsey phoned Dr. Harold Schumann, husband of Folsey's production secretary, Donna Schumann. Folsey knew that Dr. Schumann had often worked with Asian people and asked for his help. And I'll just stop right here to insert a disclaimer. I am reading from a very in-depth account and article of someone who quite literally went through the trial transcripts, attended everything. Those are their words, not mine. I did not type this up. I did not say often worked with Asian people. You can't find an Asian person. I'm sorry. It's very unserious to me. It's very disgusting. It's very xenophobic. Truly. And I just want to mention that. This is how the people who testified described what they were talking about when they were talking about hiring these children. Literally said, he knew that Dr. Schumann had often worked with Asian people. And asked if he knew a few. Awesome. Dr. Schumann called a former associate of his, Dr. Peter Chen, and explained that he had friends who were trying to cast a couple of Asian children in a movie. Dr. Chen phoned his brother Mark, who had a 6-year-old daughter named Renee. Mark discussed the idea with his wife, Cheyenne Wei, and little Renee. Cheyenne Wei thought being in a movie would be a very fine experience for Renee, who would have a lot of memories of what she had done when she grew up. The prospect of acting thrilled the girl. Dr. Chen then approached Dr. Daniel Lee and his wife Kim Hoa, parents of a 7-year-old boy named Mika. Little Mika was an outgoing child who loved getting his picture taken. When told that he could be in a movie, he had jumped up and down, shouting, "I like it, I like it." The youngsters were introduced to John Landis, who thought the cute children were perfect for the parts. Dan Allingham's duties as unit production manager on the Twilight Zone set not only entailed hiring the crew with Landis's approval, but also finding all the locations needed for the production. Allingham would interview a few special effects supervisors and send them in to meet the director if he liked them. Landis would enthusiastically describe the final scene to all of them, underscoring that he wanted the explosions to be big, in all caps. Ultimately, he settled on Paul Stewart, a 20-year industry veteran, as head of special effects. Another key person for Allingham to locate was the helicopter pilot who would be responsible for navigating the chopper during the complicated final scene. Everyone had been hearing stories about an expensive new adventure movie called Blue Thunder, which had been filmed earlier that spring, and which reportedly boasted some of the most spectacular helicopter stunts in movie history. Helicopters were suddenly the rage, and other filmmakers were devising action scenes involving choppers. Disclaimer, I am not a scared, anxious flyer with respect to airplanes. I get on an airplane, turbulence, you could be doing flips, and I am completely fine. I personally will never be going in a helicopter. Why, you may ask? I have been on enough cases as an attorney that deal with helicopter incidents to know too much and to be very unconfident in their consistent operation safely. I don't care what you do. It's your life. Don't start screaming and arguing for or against. I don't care. I'm just letting you know, do with that what you will. To fly the helicopters in these elaborate aerial scenes, a director will generally rely on a pilot with extensive experience in the movie business. The chief helicopter pilot on Blue Thunder was James Gavin, known as the star in the elite group of about a dozen pilots who won most of the lucrative movie assignments. Gavin was clearly too expensive to work on a relatively low-budget picture like Twilight Zone, so Allingham investigated other possibilities. Allingham called John Gamble, who was then the chief helicopter pilot for CBS News in Los Angeles. He owned a company that rented out helicopters for use on movie and television sets, and he himself had worked on a number of films, including Charlie's Angels and The Dukes of Hazzard. Going in, however, Gamble had reservations about working on Twilight Zone. The film's low budget meant that he had to take less than his usual free, but also, the job was getting less and less interesting, as Gamble said, to me because it was being cut down in size both financially and in the number of days. When he went in for the meeting, Gamble had been led to believe the job would involve 2 nights of shooting, but during the interview with Allingham, he told him that Landis hoped to finish the scene in just 1 night. Then, Dan Allingham described the scene in question. He said the set was a Vietnamese village and there would be a series of explosions in close proximity to a hovering helicopter. Gamble didn't like the sound of it. Quote, "It isn't necessary to do that," he told Allingham. "You can get the same effect doing it another way because a camera doesn't have a depth of field. Plus, the most dangerous position for a helicopter B is in a hover. There is only one way to go. Straight down." Gamble had worked on another film recently where a piece of wood had flown into the main rotor of the helicopter. The helicopter ultimately landed safely, but the repairs cost $30,000. Recalling that experience, Gamble was worried about the scene Allingham described. Quote, "What about all this wood and debris?" He asked him. "I doubt if you will crash the helicopter, but you're certainly going to do severe damage to it." According to Gamble, Allingham never mentioned to him that there would be children in the scene. Again, no one is protecting the children at any time. If you specifically and intentionally leave out a key main part of the scene to all of the people who are supposed to work to make the scene what it is and ensure that it is safe and that it doesn't go awry, clearly you know that something's wrong. That's my issue, is these are all adults, okay? These are all 30-plus-year-old adults who are all working on it. I'm tired of the whole, young kids, ruin the rest of their life. All these people, John Landis specifically, but even these, assistant directors, set managers, blah, blah, blah. I mean, for a lot of them, it was early on in their careers, but that doesn't mean that they were in their mid to late 20s, if not late 30s, okay? Please be fucking serious. You know for a damn fact as an adult that if you are leaving out a fact, it means you know it is bad. It means you know that people will say no about it. Why do you think they will say no? They won't say no because they hate children. They'll say no because they like children. God. And for what? I can't. For a fucking movie. I can't. A not even good movie at that. In the end, Gamble declined the job. Even not knowing about the children thing. He was like, yeah, no, this is batshit insane. I'm good, but I don't really think it's worth it. He said, quote, "for 1 night's work to ferry the helicopter." He thanked him and left the office. Then Allingham contacted another pilot. So now we're on 2 pilots considered. First one, too expensive. Second one said, yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much. I'm good. Okay, that's not gonna happen. Third pilot, Clayton Wright. he had worked on a Vietnam War movie shot at the same location planned for the Twilight Zone segment. The Exterminator had been filmed there in 1980, and it also included a helicopter flying through an exploding Vietnamese village, though there were no children involved. Since Twilight Zone was being done so quickly and on a low budget, it would help to have someone who knew the terrain. A 15-year veteran with more than 10,000 hours flying helicopters, Wright was another sought-after movie pilot. Initially, Allingham offered him the job, but then called back and informed Wright that the production could not afford the fee that he demanded. He told Wright that budget had become a problem and the scene might have to be eliminated. Ultimately, the scene was not eliminated, and instead, they found a cheaper pilot to do the job. That pilot was Dorsey Wingo, the fourth pilot, who had never worked before on a Hollywood studio feature. The company where Wingo was employed, Western Helicopters, had been recommended to Allingham. Western Helicopters had been in operation for more than 20 years, an impressive record among the helicopter services of Southern California, where fierce competition frequently drives such firms to bankruptcy within a few years of starting up. When Allingham went out to the company's offices in Rialto, he agreed to use any of the company's pilots. Dorsey Wingo was tagged for the job. A Vietnam veteran with thousands of hours of helicopter experience, Wingo appeared to be a consummate professional. He had spent almost a year transporting troops in and out of combat and had performed other difficult flying assignments in the Army, including some top-secret radio research. Most important of all, Wingo struck Allingham as someone who wanted the job. Unlike Gamble and Wright, who had haggled over fees and made annoying demands, Wingo seemed eminently cooperative, someone who would get along well with the rest of the crew. Allingham did not mind that Wingo's knowledge of special effects seemed to come mainly from observing a pyrotechnics display at an air show in Rialto. Once the key personnel had been hired and the location secured, the Landis organization geared up for production. This meant blocking out the shots that would be filmed each day, arranging call sheets for all cast and crew members, building the sets, and acquiring the necessary props. But several members of the crew were dismayed by the slapdash manner of pre-production on Twilight Zone. Quote, "It was chaos, total and complete," said Donna Schumann of The Atmosphere in The Office. The emphasis was on doing things cheaply rather than correctly. There were not enough desks, there were no typewriters, the Xerox machine was inadequate, the phone system didn't work, requiring people to go back and forth into different offices in order to pick up a phone call. There was no one there to answer the phones. Furthermore, ordinarily on a movie like this, there is a pre-production meeting in which the director, the producer, the heads of all departments, including cinematography, art direction, and special effects, and the production executives at the studio get together and go over the script page by page to discuss any potential problems that may arise. According to Warner Brothers Vice President Edward Morey, no such meeting ever took place in connection with John Landis' segment of Twilight Zone, the movie. Script supervisor Catherine Wooten remembered several people on the crew complaining, quote, "Gee, too bad we didn't have a pre-production meeting because then we'd know how to coordinate certain things." In addition to that, there was cost-cutting measures. So it's like there's no pre-production meeting, and then also there were people who had two roles that should have been split into two. Like the unit production manager was also kind of an assistant director. It's like a mess, okay? Everything's a mess. Just know that it was a gosh damn mess. When the second assistant director was finally hired in mid-June filming in 1982, he was given a copy of the screenplay, the revised version with the Vietnam scene, which he took home with him to read. Everything looked fine to House until he came to the Vietnam sequence. The text indicated that the scene would be shot at night, away from the studio. Moreover, there appeared to be a number of stunts connected with the scene, and those stunts apparently involved children. How, he wondered, did Landis intend to film children at night in close proximity to explosives and a low-flying helicopter? House was familiar with the regulations governing the employment of minors in the entertainment industry, and the scene as written definitely did not conform to those rules. House called Allingham to voice his concerns. House, the assistant director. Second AD, okay? Second. He told Allingham that he assumed the children would not really be working after hours and that their scenes would be shot at a studio in a simulated night scene. "No," Allingham responded. "They are going to be working night for night, just as the script suggested." House noted gingerly that this was illegal, and Allingham countered that he was well aware of that fact. "Oh, okay, so we're just pointing guns at each other and just pointing it at our faces. Like, that's what's happening with that conversation?" "Oh, no, I'm aware. I'm not even going to plausible deniability, play dumb, close my eyes, close my ears. No, I'm well aware. See you at work." That's Jesus Christ. House reread the script again and again. Each time he came upon the scene involving the children, he grew more apprehensive. It was not just the illegal night shooting that worried him, but the helicopter and the explosives. "It seemed like this was a potentially very dangerous situation," he later said. House took it upon himself, therefore, since he knew that they were going to be doing illegal shit and didn't care regardless of what he said, he took it upon himself to research alternative ways of filming the scene. He tracked down the names of stunt doubles who were dwarfs, had dwarfism, who were small, who might be used in place of the children. One possibility was the man who doubled for Eileen Quinn in Annie, a recently released movie that had included a number of carefully orchestrated stunts involving the title character. In House's view, it was always safer to work with adults. In the event of an emergency, they were capable of independent judgment that young children did not have. Over the course of the next few days, House had 2 more conversations with Dan Allingham in which he expressed his concerns about the final scene. Allingham agreed to raise the possibility of stunt doubles with Landis, but he had a pretty good idea of what Landis's response would be. No. The director had already decided how the Twilight Zone money should be allocated. Stunt doubles were apparently expensive, and one production aide claims to have overheard Allingham grumbling that Landis was using up most of the movie's budget on explosives. When Allingham indicated that no stunt double would be small enough to satisfy Landis, House again countered, kept going, with a proposal to use dolls or dummies. Landis rejected that idea as well. Dummies would not look sufficiently lifelike in the tight close-up shots that Landis had envisioned. House tried to press the matter. He tried to press it. He pressed it and pressed it and pressed it, but the normally affable Allingham was growing impatient. As far as he was concerned, the matter was closed. There was a tremendous amount of work still to be done before the start of shooting. He wanted to hear nothing further about children, dwarves, or dummies from Andy House. If House was so upset about all this, Allingham would see to it that someone else took responsibility for the children. House did not want to seem like a pest. He told himself that the children would certainly never be filmed in close proximity to the explosions. There were many ways of filming the scene in question. Probably Landis intended to film the explosions first, and then shoot the close-ups of the children after the village had already been destroyed. These shots could easily be inserted into the main action during the editing process. As a matter of fact, almost everyone who read the script assumed that this was how the sequence would be filmed. The use of insert shots was a common device in scenes involving actors and special effects. It was always described as a big, huge explosion, Donna Schumann said. John said he was going to blow that village off the face of the earth. You couldn't put 2 little kids in the middle of that. On the night of July 22nd, 1982, Renee and Ma-ca were on location at Indian Dunes Park. According to Death in the Twilight Zone, a Rolling Stone article on the case, the park is actually a private property enclosed by steep, chaparral-covered cliffs. At the base of one of those cliffs, on the south shore of the Santa Clara River, a shallow, slow-moving stream that irrigates orange and avocado groves a few miles to the west, a Vietnamese village had been assembled out of bamboo poles, palm thatch, and cardboard. There were several delays in shooting. At one point, the pilot of the helicopter, Dorsey Wingo, talked about the scene with Vic Morrow. The actor was planning to toss a stick at the helicopter as he escaped across the river and wondered if that would be a problem. Wingo worried that an object contacting the rotor could be dangerous. Perhaps it would not do any harm, he suggested, if Morrow threw a lightweight piece of balsa. Landis wanted to add some more realism to the youngsters' appearance, so he smeared a little mud on their faces and tore holes in their clothing. To set the children at ease, Morrow made funny faces. Both youngsters giggled uncontrollably. They could not stop when the camera started rolling, and Landis had to repeatedly halt the scene and tell the kids to quit laughing. He got the scene he wanted at 3:30 a.m. Their parents were given envelopes with $500 in cash inside and told the children would be needed again the next night. The kids showed up late, July 23rd, 1982. Renee was again accompanied by her mother and Ma-ca by his father. It was the night that they were going to film the climactic scene of Bill carrying 2 children across the river away from the attacking helicopter, ending with his vow, "I'll keep you safe, kids, I'll swear to God," as the village exploded in the background. At 9:30 p.m., Landis needed a shot before that one. Renee and Ma-ca were in a hut, and Morrow was to pick them up and carry them to shore. Landis was directing the scene from several feet out in the water. A water bomb exploded, and Renee started crying because dust got in her eyes. Concerned, Cheyenne Hui Chen asked George Folsey, "Is it dangerous?" This is, again, her mother. "No, not dangerous," he assured her. "Just a loud noise." The director comforted Renee. Then the 2 children with their parents went back to a motorhome to rest up for the final scene. That scene's first shot of a helicopter heading toward the mock village was filmed at 11:30 p.m. Pilot Wingo sat in the cockpit with Dan Allingham, who was focusing a spotlight on the scene underneath. Vic Morrow stood in the river. Technicians fired guns, cueing special effects experts to detonate bombs. Flames flew toward the chopper. A water ball splattered the windshield, and Wingo could not see out of it. He put his head out of the window and swore because the heat burned him. A fire safety officer named Richard Ebentheuer told his superior, George Hull, he was concerned that the helicopter might crash because of the size of the blasts. Hull told him to take his fears to the filmmakers. Ebentheuer let out a cuss word and said, "The helicopter will be on the ground." Later, Ebentheuer was asked in court why he did not take Hull's advice and report his fears directly to the movie makers. He testified, "That's not the way the chain of command works in the fire department." Thus, neither Hull nor Ebentheuer took the latter's criticisms up with the filmmakers. When the helicopter landed, Wingo told Allingham to let Landis know that the explosion should not be so close to the aircraft. "You're right," Allingham agreed, saying, "Safety first." Camera operator Roger Smith said he would not film it unless someone made sure the explosives did not get so close to the helicopter. Allingham assured him, too, that he would take it up with Landis. Allingham later told Smith not to worry because he had spoken to the director, and Landis said that in the next scene, they would be flying over the water filming Vic and the two kids. Assistant camera operator Randy Robinson and Wingo were discussing the intense heat of the fireball, and a smiling Landis told them, "You ain't seen nothing yet." God, I hate this. I hate it more than anything. Truly hate it. For the scene showing Morrow under attack in a swampy bog, Landis wanted to see the banana plants in the river decimated by gunfire. But the marble gun used at first was not convincing. The marbles were simply bouncing off the banana plants. Landis called a halt, and Paul Stewart tried the scene again. This time the marbles made holes in the banana plants, but still failed to cut them down. Landis was growing agitated. This was not the effect that Stewart had promised him. What more could be done? Stewart told Landis he could rig the banana plants with explosive quibs that would simulate machine gun fire. How long will that take? Landis asked. When Stewart said he would need 15 or 20 minutes, Landis shot back impatiently, "We don't have that kind of time." Camera operator Stephen Ledecker, who observed that exchange, next saw Landis and Stewart walk back toward the special effects truck. When Stewart returned a couple of minutes later, he was carrying 3 Remington shotguns. Stewart handled one of the guns himself and distributed the others to members of his team. Ledecker saw 12-gauge shotgun cells set on top of the camera battery. Vic Morrow wanted to know what was going on. Landis reassured him, and in a moment cried, "Action." The scene called for Morrow to duck under the water in front of the banana plants, come back up, then leap out of the frame as the guns began firing. To make sure that Morrow escaped in time, Kenny Indoso, a stuntman who was standing out of camera range, actually pulled Vic away from the banana plants. Just 3 seconds later, the effects men began firing at the plants. According to Stewart, they fired 12 rounds of ammunition at the target. About half were the shotgun shells that Ledecker had observed, and the other half were red jets, plastic projectiles that are less potent than real bullets but can still be lethal. Still photographer Maureen Renard was standing just 10 feet from Morrow when, as he recalls, the special effects men just started pumping live ammo into the water. The marksmen were about 20 feet from actor Vic Morrow, and several crew members were less than 100 feet from the source of the gunfire. 2 gaffers manning the arc lights that illuminated the scene were within range of the shotguns. Steve Ledecker, an experienced hunter, knew that Remington rifles can shoot a distance of 75 yards. In addition, these shells could easily ricochet when they hit the water. Nevertheless, neither Vic Morrow nor any member of the crew was given a protective shield while the scene was being filmed. Ledecker did not hear Landis or Stewart warn anyone on the set about potential danger. Now, you might just think, oh, it was the 80s, right? Shit went on. That was just the way things happen. No, that actually wasn't the way things were done. And this is what kills me is I'm like, you cannot even blame it on the culture of the time. You literally can't. You can blame it on John Landis, and that's pretty much it. And everyone else who was complicit, yes, but like this was not industry practice. This incident itself provoked particularly strong reactions from other industry professionals who heard about it later. John Sylvia, safety director at the Burbank Studios, said that in the 15 years he'd been working on the lot, he had never once seen or heard of live ammunition being used on a movie set. Robert Marta, a safety committee chairman of the Cameramen's Union, Photographers Local 659, compared the use of live ammunition to having nitroglycerin at a gasoline refinery. Then why did Landon allow the use of live ammunition on the Twilight Zone set if this was not even industry practice? It can be partly explained by the film's tight budget and the pressure to finish on time, but also his priorities and not caring about literally anyone's safety and wanting to just be reckless, like literally giving a child matches. What do you think they're going to do with them? There was no oversight. He could do whatever he wanted, and he didn't give a shit. On the afternoon of July 22nd, Warner Brothers Vice President Edward Morey was leafing through the shooting schedule for the Landis segment of Twilight Zone the movie. His script summary indicated that children were to appear in the Vietnam sequence then being filmed, but the call sheets contained no mention of child actors or of the teacher welfare worker required by law to oversee the safety of minors employed on a motion picture. Morey put in a call to the production manager, Dan Allingham, at the Landis office. "I was checking the schedule, and I noticed that there were no children or welfare worker listed," Morey said. "The description indicated that children should be working." Disingenuously, Allingham pleaded ignorance about the children. He told Morey that he had been up in the helicopter the night before and someone else was, quote, taking care of that end of it. "Would you please check it out for me?" Morey asked. "Yes, I will," Allingham said. Allingham never called Morey back. In the early morning hours of July 23rd, the 2 children, Ma-ca and Renee, were found sleeping in the trailer. George Folsey and an assistant woke them up and asked if the 6- and 7-year-old wanted a bite to eat. Later, both parents would claim that Folsey warned them against letting firefighters on the set know that the children were employed. "If the firemen approach you," he supposedly said, "please tell them that you are not working for us. Say you are my friend, you are here to help me, don't tell them anything about the money or the children working." Since Chen's English was poor, Folsey allegedly asked Dr. Lee to repeat the message to her. He did, but in English because he was Vietnamese and she was Chinese and he did not speak her native tongue, which is such a commentary on how they were treating them, all of them. You don't even know that she's a different nationality than the other Asian child and their family on set. come fucking on. As Chen and Dr. Lee stood with the other spectators watching the helicopter approach the faux village, anxiety seized Chen. Is it dangerous? She asked Dr. Lee. George told me it would be scary, he replied, but he said not to worry. At 2:20 a.m., John Landis ordered the filming to start. Vic Morrow went into the knee-deep water holding a child under each arm. The director shouted through his bullhorn at the helicopter, lower, lower, lower. An assistant repeated the order to the pilot through a walkie-talkie. Fire, 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 Landis commanded. Machine gunners Gary McLarty and Kenny Indoso fired as the aircraft descended. A special effects technician set off simulations of shots hitting the water. James Chamomile, a burly, soft-spoken technician, was in charge of setting off bombs in the back of the village. He worked with a firing board on which he ran a nail across to detonate explosions. Chamomile had a welder's hood on his head to keep dust out of his eyes. Another technician, Jerry Williams, set off blasts at another side of the village. 2 camera operators ran up a slope to get away from the pain of the heat. The blasts also terrified My-ca's father, Daniel Lee, who was a survivor of the Vietnam War. He was a civilian in Vietnam when the actual war happened and had immigrated to the US with his wife afterwards. All of the memory of the war came to my mind, he claimed. I was so horrified, I was screaming. The second blast I felt down on the ground, I cried God. I was so fearful and I knew danger. It was not something made up, but real danger. Wingo felt his craft was in trouble and had difficulty guiding it through the fireballs. Sitting beside him in the cockpit, Allingham was alarmed and told the pilot to get out of there. On the ground, Chamomile did not know of the helicopter's troubles. He detonated 2 charges close together, and those bombs in some way harmed the aircraft. The helicopter went out of control. In the water, Morrow dropped Renee Chen. He grabbed at her, but the helicopter's right skid slammed into the child, killing her. Then its whirling main rotor ripped off the middle-aged actor's head and the head, a shoulder, and an arm of 7-year-old Mika. That's a wrap, John Landis shouted through the loudspeaker, and the standard banal words signaling the end of filming day sounded sickeningly incongruous. Leave your equipment where it is. Everyone go home. Please, everyone go home. One of the first things that the crew observed after the disaster at Indian Dunes was the hurried departure of Frank Marshall, the movie's executive producer and the closest delegate of Steven Spielberg. Before he beat his hasty retreat, Marshall urged the crew to return to their homes as quickly as possible. Given the magnitude of the tragedy that had just occurred, many wondered if that was an appropriate order. Quote, "It might have been better if we had stayed together for a while to console each other," says script supervisor Catherine Wooten, who had to drive 50 miles by herself at 3 a.m. in order to reach her apartment in Marina del Rey. It was dangerous to drive home feeling the way I felt, Wooten adds. She had become violently ill after she caught a glimpse of the dismembered corpses floating in the river and heard Mrs. Chen screaming over her daughter's lifeless body. Dr. Daniel Lee began shrieking when he saw his dead son being carried off with his neck sticking out and headless, as he later put it. The boy's right arm and shoulder had also been severed. 2 men had to restrain Dr. Lee as he ran screaming towards the river. He and Mrs. Chen were both treated for shock at a local hospital and then were driven home. Jack Rimmer, one of the fire safety officers, covered Vic Morrow's torso and set it on the bank. As he was wading across the river to the village to douse the fires there, Rimmer found My-ca Lee's head in the water. A crew member brought over a plastic garbage bag and placed the little boy's severed head inside. Special effects technician Kevin Quibell located Vic Morrow's head, which was placed in another black plastic bag. While stunned crew members were retrieving the bodies, others had raced over to the downed helicopter to rescue the men inside. The crew credited Dorsey Wingo with extraordinary navigation in saving the people aboard the helicopter when the ship crashed. Wingo, Dan Allingham, and the 2 stuntmen, Gary McLarty and Kenny Indoso, were taken out first. Cameraman Roger Smith and Randall Robinson lay trapped under the machine guns inside the copter. While he was lying there, Robinson saw someone walk by carrying the torso of My-ca Lee. Only then did he realize that people on the ground had been killed. Wingo was in a daze as he was led from the scene. When he reached the Western helicopter service truck that had accompanied him to Indian Dunes, Wingo asked the driver, Craig Wooten, "Where's Vic?" Wooten answered, "The main rotor got him. The kids too." The special effects crew and the firemen rushed over to the village to extinguish the fires. Jerry Williams headed straight toward the 4-legged structure at the river's edge, which was still charred and burning when he approached it. He wanted to know whether the mortar he had placed under the hut had caused the accident. The evidence was inconclusive. The hut was badly damaged, but Williams could not tell whether bamboo from that structure had been catapulted into the helicopter's rotor system. Dorsey Wingo, Dan Allingham, Roger Smith, and Randall Robinson, the passengers in the helicopter, were driven to the hospital and in Valencia and treated for bruises. John Landis was also taken there. He was treated and released within an hour. George Folsey Jr. and John Landis wanted to deliver eulogies at Vic Morrow's funeral. A close friend of the actor, Steve Shagan, reacted skeptically when the 2 said they wanted to speak about Morrow. Folsey privately read his intended remarks to Shagan, who exploded in outrage. "Why don't you just run the trailer?" he asked sarcastically. "Let's set up a screen right here. We can even sell tickets. You're not going to read that thing. There has to be a time and place where somebody isn't selling fucking tickets." Both Folsey and Landis did read remarks at Morrow's funeral. Quote, "If there's any consolation in this," Folsey told the assembled mourners, "oh, this is disgusting." Quote, "It is that the film was finished. Thank God. This performance must not be lost. It was Vic's last gift to us. Jesus Christ. Landis's eulogy sounded equally self-serving and clumsily ironic. Quote, tragedy can strike in an instant, but film is immortal. Vic lives forever. Just before the last take, Vic took me aside to thank me for the opportunity to play this role. Unconfirmed. Unfucking confirmed. We don't know that he said that. At Renee Chen's funeral, a gray-faced John Landis, being held up by his wife and a friend, showed up to pay his respects. The child's relatives fixed cold, accusing stares at the director, except for Renee's mother, who was sobbing. Landis also went to My-ca Lee's funeral. The boys' choir, to which My-ca had belonged, sang his favorite hymn, Jesus Loves All the Children of the World. There is no question, at least, that the accident did traumatize the director. For several weeks after it, he was heavily medicated. At one point, he called a confidant and wondered if he would ever be able to ask anyone to take even the simplest direction. Oh, I'm glad that he's worried about his career. Awesome. Nevertheless, he was soon back in the director's chair because, again, Hollywood doesn't give a fuck about what you do or how you do it so long as you can make money. And John Landis had shown he can make money. That's all they care about. In the 4 years between the accident and his ultimate manslaughter trial, Landis would take on several projects, including Michael Jackson's video Thriller. He would also direct Into the Night, in which he acted the part of a brutal, although comically clumsy murderer that Hollywood would continue to hire Landis, should not cause shock. He could make money. And additionally, some believe that having been once so badly burned, he would become especially careful. Isn't that funny that you would just assume that about someone? No. The grieving families, however, and rightfully so, filed lawsuits. Mark and Cheyenne Wei Chen filed suit August 3rd, 1982, asking for $200 million in damages and naming Landis, Spielberg, George Folsey Jr., Paul Stewart, Dorsey Wingo, Frank Marshall, Warner Brothers, Western Helicopters, the owners of Indian Dunes Park, and a host of other defendants. My-ca Lee's family filed their suit over a year later. Replying to Chen's lawsuit, the law firm hired by Warner Brothers filed a motion to dismiss the case, contending that the risk, if any risk there was knowingly assumed by the decedent, Renee Chen. Vic Morrow's daughters, Carrie Morrow and actress Jennifer Jason Leigh, filed suit against Warner Brothers, Landis, Spielberg, and others in late 1982. They settled about a year later. The terms of the settlement have never been made public. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office needed to determine if there was criminal liability for the accident. District Attorney John Van de Kemp assigned prosecutor Gary Kesselman to the case. Sergeant Thomas Buds, who headed the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's probe into the incident, assisted Kesselman in his investigation. Kesselman soon uncovered a whole lot of troubling and confusing information. When he interviewed Donna and Dr. Schumann, they told him that they had no idea that the children they helped recruit would be near either explosives or a low-flying helicopter. Cynthia Nye told him that Landis, as well as Folsey and Allingham, knew they were breaking the law when they hired the youngsters, and she told him of Folsey's nervous joke that they would probably all go to jail for it. To obtain the information he needed, Kesselman granted several of those people involved immunity from prosecution. Second Assistant Director Anderson House, James Chamomile, who had set off the explosives that downed the helicopter, and all of the special effects crew that served under Paul Stewart, but not Stewart itself, got immunity. House told Kesselman that the children had been deliberately hidden from Jack Tice, a fire safety officer who was sometimes a teacher welfare worker and would surely have reported the illegal hiring. House also said he had warned Dan Allingham about risks to the children. At the grand jury hearings, Paul Stewart and Dorsey Wingo refused to answer questions, citing the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. Folsey testified and said that in retrospect, he would have wanted to shoot the helicopter at one time and the actor and the children at a separate time. John Landis testified and blamed other people for the tragedy. He said he had assumed Stewart and Wingo had worked out the coordination of their jobs. He did not make certain of it because, quote, I assumed if these men are experts licensed by the government to do their jobs, they've done their jobs. You were preventing literally everyone from doing their fucking job, but okay. Kesselman pressed on as to why he did not make sure they talked. Because when you get into a taxi, Landis replied, you assume the driver is not going to drive you off a bridge. It's just assumptions. The guy is a licensed taxi driver. These are experts. You are the one running the fucking show. And everyone kept telling you to do shit and you kept saying no. Oh, I hate this motherfucker. I'm sorry. If my bias hasn't come through yet, it's coming through now for you, okay? Every single shred of everything that I've read about John Landis is incorrigible, genuinely and unironically. Being involved and having a hand in a horrible, horrific, and absolutely unforgivable tragedy like this should have marked you forever. It should have made you a different person to your core. Of course, the outcome that happened wasn't his intention. Of course, immediately after it happened, of course, he's not going to say, well, everything worked out exactly as I wanted. Like, of course not, okay? But we live in a society and you have to take responsibility for the shit that you do. And to be so arrogant under oath on the stand, like that is how arrogant you are under advice from your attorney, like after your attorney begged you to be fucking look remorseful or look like remorseful, but also, you know, like defend yourself, whatever. Like this is the shit that you're saying. You're like, haha, acting as if the people questioning you are fucking morons. 2 children died and a father died. A dad died. A person, an actor died. A man died. 2 children died who were illegally hired, whose parents were lied to, who were scared. You would think that this man would move different after this, at the very fucking least, right? At the very fucking least. And I'm not saying that everyone who makes horrific mistakes is irredeemable as a person or that their character is irredeemable, because there are a lot of people who have accidentally done a lot of things in their lives and absolutely committed negligence, etc. It doesn't mean you are lost. Like, it doesn't mean that your life doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that your redemption or what you do for the rest of your life doesn't matter. A lot of people, a lot of good people, a lot of well-intentioned people, or maybe a lot of bad people who didn't realize that they were bad, right, have been involved in the accidental deaths of a lot of people. But our laws are in place to grant relief to those who suffered, to the people who died. God, right? We shouldn't allow the things that happened, especially on a set like this, right? Where everything's so regulated and should be so regulated. Like, that is why, right? Like you circumvented every single protocol in the book to intentionally, willingly put people in danger. Like, you knew they were in danger. Be fucking serious. And after this, Steven Spielberg completely distanced himself from John Landis, like completely was like, you're out, cut him off. Steven Spielberg's involvement specifically with John Landis's segment, right? The 4 parts, okay? John Landis had one part of it, was limited in the sense of like, he wasn't aware of what was going on day by day with the set and the child actors and the scenes and all that shit. He has at the very least given interviews saying like it did deeply change him as a person, and he definitely like it never, like he's like, I think about it all the time, like it's horrific, blah blah blah. And he immediately was like, John Landis, like, you're dead to me, goodbye, like you're out, which is the bare minimum obviously that you could do if you are not directly involved, in the sense of like he was indirectly involved, right? That's why he's named in all these lawsuits, because he was a co-executive producer, even if he wasn't on set and wasn't making these decisions. But John Landis, from the time that this happened, has moved in his life like his shit doesn't smell. I really think that he should have been haunted by this, but letting you know that he isn't. So later, the prosecutor began, quote, "The final authority in terms of camera, actor positions, helicopter, or whatever on that set is not mine," Landis broke in. "Because if I ask an actor, I said, would you please take your hand and stick it in this garbage disposal, the actor is going to say, of course not." So Landis said, okay, my defense is going to blame the actor for the situations that I put him in. We're going to blame him. Let's see how well that goes for me. Jesus Christ, insufferable. On June 15th, 1983, the grand jury brought back its indictments. Landis, Foley, and Allingham were each charged with 2 counts of manslaughter in the deaths of Renee Chen and My-ca Dinh. The charges were based, as Farber and Green wrote, on the legal theory that if death occurs as a result of the commission of an inherently dangerous, unlawful act, that constitutes manslaughter. The illegal hiring of the children was the unlawful act. Landis, Stewart, and Wingo were indicted on 3 counts of manslaughter because of aggravated, reckless, grossly negligent acts resulting in the deaths of Morrow and the 2 children. Early on, Kesselman made a decision that would haunt the prosecution. He decided not to seek an indictment against Landis, Foley, and Allingham for the illegal hiring of the children itself, or the crime of hiring them to work past curfew, crimes of which they were indisputably guilty. Kesselman thought making these minor charges would give a jury an easy, comfortable way of avoiding convicting these men of much more serious charges. Farber and Green quote him, explaining that decision. "Both of the hiring crimes, while denominated misdemeanors, in fact are infractions. My recollection is that both of them carry a maximum sentence of 10 days in the county jail. No one in their right mind would have gone through the investigation we did, the grand jury proceeding, a preliminary hearing that was really a trial, and the trial itself merely to get convictions on infractions." So you're going to risk them getting off on everything? Whatever. The Twilight Zone, the movie, opened in theaters on June 24th, 1983. I could not make that up. Yep. It opened. Most reviews were dismal. The freshness of vision that had made the TV series so memorable was absent from the movie, and special effects could not compensate. Landis' segment was especially panned for its ham-handed moralizing. Time critic Richard Corliss said, quote, "The story hardly looks worth shooting, let alone dying for." The movie showed nothing of Renee Chen and My-ca Dinh. In fact, Landis' segment appeared about as he had written it before the decision to soften Morrow's character. The bigot just gets a magical comeuppance. The children aren't even in it. None of the scenes are in it. None of the songs are. And I'm not saying that they should have been or should not have been, but it's just like, it just underscores what the fuck was the point of it all, right? God. The lawyers for all 5 Twilight Zone defendants requested that the charges against their clients be dismissed in a January 1984 hearing before the Los Angeles Municipal Court's Judge Brian Crahan. From the start of the preliminary hearing, there was a clear division between the above-the-line defendants, Landis, Folsey, and Allingham, and the 2 below-the-line workers, Stewart and the pilot Wingo. The latter 2 even sat apart from the other 3 at a side table. Landis had continually argued that blame for the accident belonged to the, quote, experts that had failed him. At the preliminary hearing, the, quote, experts began to fight back. Trope said stingingly, the responsible party here is the director-producer, and I think Landis is trying to shift blame off to anyone and everyone he can. I agree. It was obvious that was what he was doing, and it was honestly really distasteful. I am genuinely very floored at how, and that's not just because, I'm too close to people about, if I had been their defense attorney, genuinely, I would not have gone with that angle because it's distasteful, inherently distasteful. It's inherently moronic and disgusting to an average jury member for you to pass blame off of people who died literally on camera, and we're about to watch them die on camera. And we know that they're your employees. I mean, I just cannot fathom that angle, but that's what they did. That's what they did. And I hate to say it, it worked. Ended up working. I know. Yep. A defense attorney called Landis an artist and praised his Twilight Zone segment as a cinematographic statement against racism and bigotry. He also gave a strangely cynical reason for the casting of the children. Quote, children are classically used in films other than as principals, he opined, in order to evoke emotion in an audience because adults generally don't like one another, but everyone likes children, end quote. Kesselman, however, called Cheyenne Wei Chen to the stand. Renee's mother. She spoke through an interpreter. She cried as she talked about watching her daughter die. In the corridor after this heartbreaking testimony, Landis told a reporter, quote, this is a terrible, terrible accident, and it will cause pain and anguish to all of us for the rest of our lives. I can think of nothing worse than losing a child. The idea that this could be anything other than an unforeseeable accident is not only wrong, it's bewildering. Really? You're going to put those 2 thoughts together? This is horrific, pain and anguish, terrible, horrific accident. We've seen the evidence. We've seen it. The prosecutor called casting director Marcy Lear up to the stand, and she testified that she had told Landis that hiring the children was illegal, and the scene he spoke of shooting sounded kind of dangerous. She claimed that Landis, Folsey, and Allingham said they were going to hire the kids illegally. The defense team then tried to make an issue of the cause of the crash. Prosecution witnesses said debris from an explosion had caused it. A defense attorney called experts who thought heat delamination had pared off the rotor blade's protective skin and downed the chopper. Metallurgist Gary Fowler testified that the heat from the fireball had been about 180 degrees, a lower temperature than was known to cause heat delamination. Braun argued that the defendants could not have foreseen the danger since the problem was unprecedented, which was supported by this single expert, Gary Fowler, who still works as an expert today, by the way. And that was what they went with. And ultimately, and I'm not saying he's necessarily wrong, but they are genuinely looking you dead in the eyes. After helicopters were used in the Vietnam War and helicopters were extremely difficult to fly, okay, normally, all right, we see, I guess, the helicopter tactics as this like American dream, patriotic, like look at us, like we're so inventive, but like they were inherently extremely fucking dangerous. They went down all the goddamn time. To say that explosives, which we had just watched helicopters be down by explosives literally all the time in Vietnam, just 20 years prior, less than 20 years prior, 10, 15 years prior to the filming of this film, to say and confidently agree with the idea, like as the jurors did, okay? I'm not saying these defense attorneys are wrong for putting on a defense. You have to put on a defense somehow. But to actually look someone dead in the face and nod and smile as they tell you that the defendants could not have foreseen the danger that exploding things, massive fiery things under a helicopter when it's 24 feet above the air is dangerous, that is absurd. Just because it's unprecedented that it could have gone down this way. No, it's fucking not. I'm sorry. I would have raised my hand and been like, have we just completely forgotten that we have seen a shit ton of helicopters? Like, bring a Vietnam veteran in here. Have the pilot go on the stand. I mean, he's a defendant, so I wouldn't have recommended that. But goddamn, like, it's just absurd to me. Like, it's genuinely, it just boggles my fucking mind. And this isn't, this is the first helicopter crash in history? Helicopter crashes that happen all the time. Like, since helicopters have been starting to be used, right, for private use, for use in these movies, blah, blah, blah. Like, since the dawn of helicopters have crashed for a variety of reasons. It is so fucking obscene to say, and for a jury to agree with the fact, the danger was unforeseeable, since the problem was unprecedented, since we had never literally seen this exact step-by-step arrangement of scenarios, events happen before. We have not literally seen ever on film. A helicopter crashed because there's an explosion under it. So like that, like period, get off. Are you out of your fucking mind? Just because I light off a firework under a goddamn plane and no one's ever done that before. How the fuck is that reasonably foreseeable that it's not? Oh, it's unforeseeable. It's unforeseeable that something bad would happen. It's not. The actual defense isn't bothersome to me in the sense of like, I put my attorney cap on, right? Like you have to put on zealous advocacy, a defense period. Like, sorry, these defense attorneys are bad people because they're representing people and giving them a defense. Everyone deserves a defense. Even, the most guilty people are people who we assume are guilty because they have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like, I just genuinely, I'm gonna be honest to God, like I've seen the elements of manslaughter, like the amount of things that they did, something does not have to be absolutely guaranteed for you to be charged and tried and convicted of manslaughter. Like that is not the point of that. That's not the angle. It's beyond a reasonable doubt that you fucked up and you put people in harm's way and you put them in danger that was life risking, was life altering. Flying a helicopter 24 feet above your head is inherently life threatening. After all of the times that all these people said no to all these safety measures, hide from the guy who's the safety guy, hide from all this. I need to calm down. But that's how it happened. I'm just repeating facts. I'm the messenger. If you have never heard this before, and if you have heard it, but this is more detailed than you needed and you're pissed off like me, then great. Drop a comment below. Fuck. So fucking, I'm just grossed out. The prosecutor, on the other hand, contended that the exact reason for the crash was immaterial because the helicopter was brought recklessly close to explosions. I would agree, which I hate agreeing with the prosecutors because I don't enjoy that field. But yeah, that would be common sense for you. Judge Crahan announced his decision on April 23rd, 1984. He dismissed the manslaughter charges against Folsey and Allingham because, quote, there is no hard evidence in this case to reach the inferential conclusion of homicide by mere illegal hiring. He upheld the charges against Landis, Stewart, and Wingo. The judge said that Landis, quote, appears to have gone beyond the realm of simple mechanical direction, but in fact set up, among other things, the combination of circumstances which, in the final seconds of filming, caused death and destruction. He described Stewart as the ultimate arbiter of the special effects and said Wingo knowingly hovered his helicopter at such close alignment to the explosions as to create a known risk of harm to anyone within danger zone of the crash. The jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men. About 1/3 of the jurors were Asian, Black, or Hispanic. They included 2 homemakers, a pallet repairsman, a chemist, and a clerk typist. Judge Roger Boren presided over the actual trial. Because the previous decision was just to bring those charges against those people. So now it's the trial based on the charges that the judge allowed to stay on. The prosecutor for the trial was Leah Perwin de Agostino. I'm just going to call her Leah because de Agostino is not that hard to pronounce, but I don't know. I'm getting tongue-tied today. In her opening statement, Leah told the jurors that they would see footage of the crash. Quote, what you will see is no illusion. She said, you'll see real fires put out with real water. The helicopter you will see is no toy, and they were very, very real deaths, not ones where the people could get up and wipe the ketchup off. You won't see My-ca Dinh or Vic Morrow walk in from the back of this courtroom and put their heads back on. James Neal, on the defense, however, told the jury that the scene of the fatal shooting had been meticulously planned and carefully rehearsed. No, it wasn't, but okay. Action films are meant to appear dangerous, he said, and proof will show that had this scene gone as planned and rehearsed, there would have been no accident. Unforeseeable events and the mistakes of a technician named James Chamomile had caused the tragedy, according to him. The defense attorney, Neal, informed the jury that Chamomile had detonated 2 explosions almost simultaneously without looking up to check the location of the helicopter and in direct contravention of the prearranged plan. His error was compounded when one of the blasts misfired and married with the other, creating a fireball far larger than anyone anticipated. Moreover, Neal insisted the defendants could not possibly have known that the heat generated by the fireball would cause the helicopter's tail rotor to delaminate, since such an occurrence was unprecedented in the history of aviation. It was this delamination, the melting away of the rotor's protective skin, that disabled the aircraft and forced it to spin out of control. The prosecutor's first witness, Donna Schumann, acknowledged that testifying against Foley was uncomfortable for her since he was a personal friend, but she did admit, testifying on the record, that he told her that the children would be hired without the required permits from the Labor Commission. Schumann also related statements she attributed to Folsey and Landis that she had not mentioned in testimony before either the grand jury or in the preliminary hearing. She claimed that she had asked Folsey what the penalty was for working kids illegally. She said he replied, quote, a slap on the wrist and a little fine. Unless they find out about the explosives, then they'll throw my butt in jail. Landis then said lightheartedly, we're all going to jail. Under cross-examination, Schumann said that the previous prosecutor in the case, Gary Kesselman, agreed not to ask her about the remarks in prior court appearances out of respect for her feelings testifying against her friend Folsey. She also said that Kesselman wanted to withhold knowledge of the remarks from the defense. He said, you never put your whole case on until you go before the jury, she claimed, and that's the only time the defense really needs to have everything. This testimony proved to be a gift for the defense. Under the rules of discovery, the prosecution must make all evidence available to the defense before trial. The defense did know about Schumann's quotes from Landis and Folsey before the trial proper, but could still claim the information had been wrongly hidden from them by the prior prosecutor before the prior proceedings. As one of the attorneys, James Neal, put it, quote, "We have a witness who is absolutely lying, or we have a prosecutor who is deliberately withholding information from us." The prior prosecutor, Gary Kesselman, was then subpoenaed, who is now since off the case, completely off the case. He was put on the stand and he contradicted Schumann's testimony. He claimed that Schumann had never told him that either Landis or Folsey said anything about fearing they would go to jail. So, like, this is the issue, okay? The current prosecutor, okay, she's like, I stand by my witness. I believe her 100%, blah, blah, blah. But what the defense did here, okay, and what this did was successfully divert attention from the relevant issue of whether or not Folsey and Landis feared jail for their illegal hiring of children to, as a lot of people put it, the contest of credibility between Schumann and Kesselman. Like, this shit doesn't matter. In the grand scheme, like, they knew what they were doing. They knew it was illegal. And we have other witnesses who also were aware that this shit was illegal. Like, we have other witnesses that can say that, yes, like, he told my children that we needed to hide from the fire chief and blah, blah, blah. Like, she is not the only witness to basically testify and provide evidence that they knew that they were illegally hiring children, blah, blah, blah. And it's not even like the end game of all the clusterfucks that happened on set that you could prove as evidence of like an air and an environment that this director and all the people who were the above the house, above the line people, they were fostering, that it was an unsafe environment. They were doing whatever they could to get the movie made in a short amount of time, cheaply, and without safety protocols being followed. I mean, why the fuck would you care so much about this one? Oh my God, I cannot with the decisions made by the prosecution here. So yeah, so now like everyone's distracted. No one's focused on the issue, and now we're talking about who's lying and who isn't lying. Well, we know there are people who for sure aren't lying. So let's go to them. Like, enough. Oh my God, that was a bad choice. That was a bad choice. Okay. The prosecution then called the deputy commissioner for like the labor laws, okay, whatever, the council in the region who had already levied fines against Warner Brothers and Landis and all these people for employing these children, okay, in violation of the child labor laws and regulations, who laid out basically all the rules. You can't film past 8:30 p.m. You need a special, waiver, you need to ask for it. But they also said, like explosives around children is very dangerous. Like basically, if a teacher welfare person had seen this, they would have stopped. And they had the power to stop everything. Like, that is the law. They had the power to do that. So no shit, that's why Landis hid the children from them. Duh, okay? Inevitably, however, the most heart-tugging testimony was that of the parents. My-ca's mother, Hoi Kim Lee, was the first of the parents to testify. She was a social worker who aided abused and neglected children. Under the prosecutor's questioning, she claimed not to know that permits were required for children working at night or that My-ca would be near a helicopter or explosive. She also remembered Folsey saying after the first night of shooting, quote, "You don't have to come back. I will treat your children as my own." The prosecutor then asked about the next night when her husband went alone with My-ca to Indian Dunes. "Did you ever see My-ca again?" The prosecutor asked. "No," the witness replied, her eyes brimming with tears. Then Renee's father, Mark Chen, testified. He denied being told that his child should have had a permit to work legally at Indian Dunes or that the girl would be in close proximity to a helicopter and explosives. At one point, he began crying. Over defense objections, jurors saw the film of the accident at Indian Dunes. It was 20 minutes, okay? Full of footage, like straight. And it's like uncut, okay, obviously, right? Just like raw footage. 20 minutes of footage included the 2 a.m. rehearsal and the scene shot at 9:30 p.m., 11:30 p.m., and 2:20 a.m. The court met at the Samuel Goldwyn Theater on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. The movie began with scenes from the 9:30 shot, close-ups of Morrow running to the hut where the children were huddling and carrying them away just before 2 mortars explode. John Landis called action, and Vic Morrow came on the scene. He grabbed up Renee and My-ca, then ran toward the camera as mortars exploded around the little group. Cut, Landis yelled. The film showed the director walking up to the camera and signaling the helicopter pilot to fly away. A special effects worker hosed the fire from a hut. Other segments showed the violent thrashing of a rotor and My-ca's hair blowing. The 11:30 p.m. scene was more frightening, and the prosecutor argued that it ought to have unequivocally warned of the danger of special effects explosions close to a helicopter. Camera operator Roger Smith appeared unsteady in his movements. A mortar exploded in the water and splashed large columns of water against the aircraft. The mood in the theater was somber and became even more so as the 2 a.m. rehearsal appeared on the screen. The segment showed Landis with his bullhorn wading through the water. Morrow was seen holding a child under each arm. There was an explosion, sprays of water, and simulated machine gun fire. Then Morrow stumbles forward in the water, which rises to his waist. Suddenly, there is only a large spray of white water filling the screen. The wall of water quickly falls and reveals the helicopter's fuselage, lying at an awkward angle on the ground. The sound ends, creating a silently fearsome scene. People running toward the helicopter. Landis runs desperately to the far side of the helicopter as a red landing light on the aircraft flashes on and off. The village huts are engulfed in billowing flames. There was another view from a camera on a cliff looking down at the mock village. A crash off-screen was heard. Then, the film showed a close-up of Morrow, apparently taken from directly across the river, looking into the village. He is seen tightening his grip on the children as the rotor wash pushes at him. Here, his struggle, whether exaggerated by his acting or made real by an unexpected combination of wind, water, and the children's weight, is obvious. The children's feet drag in the river, and Renee is immersed to her knees. Just after Morrow stumbles, the flash of a fireball washes out the images. When the three are seen again, Ma-ca is held high above the water, but Renee is in the water up to her neck. She appears to slip in Morrow's arms as he tries to stand upright. Just as Morrow strengthens his grip on the children, the sound of a rotor blade hitting the water is heard. A massive spray of water hides from view the terrible moment of death. The bodies of Morrow, Renee, and Ma-ca are never discernible on film. The main rotor blade makes one revolution before the tip of one blade sticks in the mud of the riverbed. The prosecutor commented, "The jurors are not supposed to make up their minds until they've heard all the evidence, but you can't not see what you've seen. They've just seen 3 people killed. And for what? For a lousy movie." Renee's mother also testified, detailing how Landis and George Folsey had reassured her that it was not dangerous and to specifically say no to the fire department people if they come over and ask if you are working. You will say no, you will say no. Don't mention anything about the money. That's what they told her. She then detailed exactly what she witnessed when she saw the accident happening. She saw the helicopter fall. One of the defense attorneys questioned one of the parents of the dead children about what he knew of explosives. The father became visibly flustered, quote, "I don't know about the technicalities. I was scared. I've never been so scared in my entire life." As if they're supposed to be the ones to know about the fucking explosives and the regulations and the protocols and what happens and what doesn't happen. Jesus fucking Christ. The prosecutor then called several fire safety officers who had been at the Twilight Zone crash to the stand. And this should have been, I think, the nail in the coffin. Like, this should have been like, let's all go home, like, take a plea, like, you're done so, because what the fuck? George Hull, chief fire safety officer at the shooting, testified about the explosions that, quote, "These were the largest I had ever been involved in the magnitude of fire," and spoke. Hull testified that he had never been informed that the helicopter would hover 24 feet over the river, or that a bomb had been placed under one of the huts, or that live actors would be used in the final scene. He had never before been on a movie location where children were filmed in the same scene with special effects explosives, and he would have counseled against it, and he would have said no. Wonder why they hid it from him. The prosecutor would call 71 witnesses in as many days, recounting literally like everything that I basically told you up to this point, okay? The defense entire argument pretty much was putting the special effects powder technician on the stand, okay, who had gotten immunity for testifying. He was like visibly scarred by this situation event. Their entire defense was just to put it on him, that he fucked up, that he botched it. And also for John Landis, at least, John Landis pretty much blamed Vic Morrow. Like, he should have looked up and like known where to go. Oh, okay, perfect. Like, he wasn't exactly in the place that you told him to be. Whatever. They asked the powder technician, "When you set off the number 2 explosion, you were not looking at the helicopter." "I don't believe so," he answered. He acknowledged that he had not looked at the helicopter before setting off explosions 3, 4, 5, and 6. Either. The defense attorney pressed, "Isn't it a fact that the special effects man on the firing board is supposed to look at the set before you set off any of the special effects to determine at that particular point whether it is safe or not?" "That is correct, sir," he replied. So he appeared to concede at least some responsibility for the accident, but that doesn't then negate everyone else's responsibility, regardless of whether he's right or not, right? Like, what the fuck? John Landis ended up testifying in his defense. He was the first witness for the defense, okay? He testified that he chose to employ the children illegally last minute because it was still light outside at 8:30, and we were like, you know what, like, we need to get these shots, blah, blah, blah. He acted like he didn't all have it planned. He said, didn't think dummies would work. He said that no one had informed him of the danger of this scene in any conversation, in any singular conversation, not even like the hundreds of conversations that I've literally summarized for you, okay, that had definitely happened. Yeah, he said no. No one told me it was dangerous. No one told me that anyone's safety was at risk. And he had also informed, John Landis says, he informed both sets of parents that they would be in the vicinity of a helicopter and explosions, which the parents adamantly denied. In her closing arguments, the prosecutor said and reiterated that these defendants, quote, "knew from day one that the children were going to be placed in a scene involving special effects explosions in a helicopter and that Landis intended on doing it at night. Common sense tells you that this is a dangerous scene. They acted with reckless disregard for these 3 human beings." The defense claimed that John Landis did not believe that the scene was dangerous and did not act in a reckless, wanton, or grossly negligent manner because other people were in charge of knowing whether the scene was safe and keeping it safe, and that John thought it was safe because everyone else was allowed to make decisions based on the safety of the set, which is blatantly incorrect. They claimed that this was not foreseeable because John Landis had no idea. It was not foreseeable to John Landis that anything would go wrong. I believe that isn't foreseeability so much as just like the hopes, right? The hopes and dreams of someone literally running the show. When the jury began deliberating, they apparently misunderstood the judge's instructions as saying that the defendants had to believe they were putting people in danger rather than they should have known it. The should have known it is the standard, not the subjective belief. Duh. Because everyone would just be like, I don't believe. The standard is an objectively reasonable person would know that this is putting people in danger, would know that this is dangerous. That is the standard. And the jury was confused. On Friday, May 29th, 1987, the jury returned its verdict. We, the jury, in the above titled action, find the defendant John Landis not guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and thereafter read each count as to each defendant as not guilty of anything. The prosecutor appeared stunned. She looked bitter, betrayed, and abandoned. John Landis' wife, Deborah Landis, weeping with joy, went to the jurors to hug, kiss, and shake hands. The Monday after the acquittals, a jubilant John Landis appeared on Good Morning America. He said he had been the victim of a thoroughly dishonest and political prosecution. In another interview, he called the prosecutor, Leah D'Agostino, grotesque, an aberration. She is very unimportant. What is important is the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office spending this kind of money pursuing something they know damn well is bogus. 3 people are dead. 3 people are dead because of your vision. But, okay. Since his acquittal, John Landis has directed several popular movies. Coming to America, starring Eddie Murphy, was released in 1988 and became one of Landis' biggest hits. He directed Murphy again in Beverly Hills Cop 3. In 1994, Landis continues to write scripts, produce, and act. His work is not highly regarded from an artistic viewpoint, but is sought after and lucrative for its ability to make money. George Folsey Jr. continued working with Landis. Dan Allingham left the Landis and Folsey production team to produce the film Communion, based on Whitney Strieber's book of the same title about the author's supposedly true encounters with extraterrestrials. Paul Stewart got a job working in special effects on the TV series Moonlighting. He claimed to have trouble finding jobs with movie studios. Warner Brothers and Columbia will not hire me, he complained. Dorsey Wingo continued working for Western Helicopters. He did commercial flying. Although this case did not return guilty verdicts in kind of a surprising fashion, now that we look back on it, if you aren't surprised and you don't think they did anything wrong, okay, that's your opinion, you're entitled to it. But I will tell you what transpired after. Other than the settlements to the families, obviously, in relation to their lawsuits that they filed against the production company and the director, et cetera, the undisclosed amounts that they received, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, of course, wrote up an aircraft accident report because this was a helicopter crash. It stated that it believed obviously the helicopter crash was caused due to the explosions and the failure to establish direct communications and coordination between the pilot, who was in command of the helicopter operation, and the film director, who was in charge of the filming operation. They put that in their report. Like, that is the reason that this crash happened. In conjunction with this report, the NTSB sent over to the FAA these safety recommendations and protocols that they believed should be in place with respect to helicopters filming on sets. Since March of 1982, operators of airplanes, but not helicopters, used in film productions have been required to prepare a flight operations manual detailing the safety precautions that must be taken before the operators are permitted to fly the aircraft at altitudes below minimum safe altitudes established by regulations. The safety board recognizes, and I'm reading from their report here, their accident report, they recognize that the flight rules for helicopters allow pilot-initiated deviations from the minimum safe altitudes prescribed by regulation, and that practically speaking, requiring an express waiver for each operator would degrade the utility and value of the helicopter, which is its ability to hover and fly slowly at very low altitudes above the surface. Film production helicopter operators have not been required to obtain a specific waiver of the flight rules to operate at very low altitudes and have not been required to prepare a motion picture and television flight operations manual. However, because of this clusterfuck, the safety board believes that the facts, conditions, and circumstances of this accident amply demonstrate the need for a requirement that helicopter operators prepare such a manual and carry out its provisions as a prerequisite to the use of a helicopter in movie and television film production. At a minimum, the manual should contain provisions for pilot qualifications, including any special qualifications, mandatory briefings of film production personnel on the risks involved, the safeguards needed during operations, emergency procedures, a communication plan for all participating personnel, and a provision confirming the pilot and command's ultimate authority to control all flight regimes relative to this type of operation, aka the director is not at the helm. And this recommendation to the FAA was ultimately confirmed and approved, and that is now and has been a rule that they have to abide by, that they didn't before this crash. Ultimately, the success of John Landis, the continued success of him and his role in the industry and his absolute rejection of taking any responsibility for what happened to these 3 lives is not necessarily shocking, right? With respect to Hollywood, with respect to what we've seen with Harvey Weinstein, with what we've seen with all of these big actors who took years and years for allegations against them to actually be legitimized and to actually be believed, right? For assault, for abuse, for sexual assault. It's horrific and dishonorable to the profession as a whole that they care so little about the morality and ethics that go into art and entertainment. And I think that we should care about it. I don't think that the end result and the outcome should matter more than the lives of people, more than just some fucking honor and some integrity and some responsibility. Because ultimately, when you continuously employ people who are just feel like they are untouchable, tragedies happen, whether it be very high profile tragedies like something like this, or more personal tragedies that we might not even hear about, right? With respect to these people's families, their kids, or the people that they work with, come in contact with, who are silenced for years and years and years. I will start my rebuttal with this quote from Lucy Fisher, Senior Vice President of Warner Brothers. "The movie business is not a personally judgmental business. It has a twisted kind of democracy. It doesn't matter how someone got a job or even if they are doing a good job. If someone makes money, everything's okay. I think they'd hire Godzilla if he brought in 6 hit pictures." My rebuttal for today's episode is that laws are in place, child labor laws are in place, and safety regulations are in place for obvious reasons. Every safety regulation that you know about, especially with respect to OSHA regulations, which, by the way, OSHA showed up eventually and said that they had committed 36 violations on the set. But of course, no negligence was involved, right? Right. Those regulations are all written in blood. Always. And unfortunately, the blood that they are written in being spilled, yes. Does it change things for the better ultimately? Of course. Would regulations have ever changed if those people hadn't passed? Probably not, because people don't really do anything unless something horribly tragic happens, except in the case of school shootings. Hopefully, we can continue to advocate for children, not just in the movie space, the entertainment industry space, but also in the influencer space, the family vlogger space. I am a staunch advocate against putting children in any of your content and having them be the breadwinners of the family without provisions protecting their safety. And I hope that no matter where you go, you be the advocate for the children that need it. Because oftentimes their parents, oftentimes the people around them are not doing their job. And if you think that something's going on, say something. With respect to children, it's always better to be safe than sorry. Because I love my friends on the internet, and all of you are my greatest heroes. I love you all so much. And this entire show, if I were just talking to myself and didn't see all of your comments and DMs and commentary and thoughts on it, it would be nothing. So please continue to share all of your thoughts with me. God, how fun. Have a great rest of your week. I hope this was informative. God, I hate John Landis. See you next time.